Hello friends, I won't take much of your time. I just ask you to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
It started with the kind of sentence that doesn't sound cruel until you realize it's been building for 30-some years. You're old enough to stay home alone. My mom said it with that practiced, gentle tone she always used when she was about to do something selfish and pretend it was selfless. I stood in the foyer holding a grocery bag in one hand and my keys in the other, and listened to her explain how 2 weeks in Europe would be so good for my younger brother Mark's worldview before college. How he needed to experience culture and history firsthand, how she and Dad were finally taking that bucket list cruise they'd been talking about since before I could even drive. I was 32. Mark was 19. They looked straight through me like I was the neighbor's cat watching through the window, vaguely acknowledged, never invited in. I nodded, like I always do, smiled, and told them I hoped they'd have the best time. I think I even offered to water the plants. That's the kind of daughter I was raised to be. Quiet, self-sufficient, always on the sidelines, applauding for other people. As the cruise date crept closer, they gave me a rundown of things I already knew: how to set the alarm system, where the emergency cache was, when the lawn guy would come. I'd lived in that house for nearly my whole damn life. They didn't seem to notice that my room still looked like a 17-year-old lived in it. Posters from high school, a dusty bookshelf, a lamp with a cracked base I never replaced because, honestly, it didn't matter. My parents had started treating me like furniture somewhere around the time Mark got his first A in algebra. That was the moment he became the one with potential, and I quietly faded into the background. When they pulled out of the driveway that Friday afternoon, waving from the SUV like they were headed off to paradise, which I guess they were, I watched from the upstairs window and didn't wave back. I just stood there, arms crossed, soaking in the silence. For a minute, it felt nice. No TV blaring golf tournaments, no smell of Dad's horrible pipe tobacco, no endless commentary from my mother about Mark's grades or girlfriend or his bright future in computer science. Just the sound of the air conditioner clicking on and the faint creak of the house settling around me. I walked through every room slowly, like I was saying goodbye to something, though at that moment I didn't fully know what. I opened closets I hadn't looked in for years, found baby albums with Mark's face on every page, and mine tucked into the background like a mistake someone didn't want to admit. I wasn't angry, not yet, just numb, that kind of numb that wraps itself around your ribs and doesn't let go. But it wasn't until I opened the filing cabinet in Dad's office that something shifted. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe proof that I mattered in this house. What I found instead was a deed. Our house, the one they told me was theirs, was actually under all three of our names. A joint ownership agreement signed when I was 21 and too busy paying off my student loans to read the fine print. I don't know why they put my name on it. Maybe for tax reasons, maybe to feel generous, but suddenly, that house wasn't just the place where I grew up unnoticed. It was partly mine, legally. And that realization felt like striking a match in a room soaked in gasoline. They left me behind for Europe, again, because I was old enough and responsible and all the other words they used to justify ignoring me while handing the world to my brother on a silver platter. I'd been babysitting Mark since I was 11, missed dances and sleepovers because he needed help with homework or got sick or didn't want to be alone. And now they were giving him Venice and Paris and Barcelona, and I got to feed the damn fish. That night, I made pasta, poured a glass of wine, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop like it held the answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask out loud. I opened Zillow, Craigslist, a couple online auction sites. I clicked through furniture listings. Remembered how much the dining room table cost when Mom had it custom made. How Dad bragged about his antique watch collection that he never wore, but kept locked up like family heirlooms, even though none of it came from family. And for the first time in years, I didn't just feel forgotten, I felt free. I realized I didn't owe them a damn thing, not a note, not an explanation, not a single moment of regret. Because you know what? If they could pack up and leave without a second thought, so could I. But I wouldn't just leave. I'd leave right. So I made a plan, a quiet, deliberate, brilliant plan. They took a cruise. I was going to take everything else. And the best part? They wouldn't even realize it until it was way too late. It's a strange kind of ache, the kind that doesn't come from one big event or a specific wound, but from the slow, relentless erosion of your worth over time. Like water dripping on stone until there's a crater where your sense of belonging should be. That's what it felt like growing up in my family. Not outright abuse, not cruelty in the traditional sense, but something more insidious, like being the second choice in a one-child family. There were always two of us, sure, but only one ever really mattered. Mark was the golden boy from the moment he could walk without falling over. He was charming, funny, and quick with numbers, and once my parents realized he had a knack for computers, they poured everything into him like he was some kind of investment portfolio with a guaranteed return. It was never malicious, at least not in the obvious ways. They didn't hit or scream or lock me in closets. They just forgot. They forgot I had dreams too. They forgot birthdays, missed school plays, and shrugged when I brought home straight A's like they were a given, a background score to Mark's solo performance. And as much as I hated to admit it, I stopped trying to be seen somewhere around my sophomore year of high school because I figured if invisibility was the role they'd cast me in, I might as well learn to play it well. I still remember my 18th birthday, or rather, the lack of it. I was supposed to go out to dinner with my parents, just the three of us, but Mark twisted his ankle playing basketball that afternoon, and suddenly the night became about ice packs and takeout and making sure he was comfortable. My mother looked at me and said, "We'll celebrate another day, honey," like it was a reschedule and not a cancellation of what little acknowledgement I ever got. We never did, and that was how it always went. Delay, distract, dismiss. I wasn't hated. I was just optional. College was the first time I got a taste of life outside that dynamic, but even then, they made sure I never strayed too far. I commuted from home to save money because we couldn't afford a dorm, though they somehow managed to upgrade Mark's bedroom with a gaming setup that could have paid for 2 semesters. I had to take night shifts at a diner to cover books and fees, while Mark got tutoring and summer programs and glowing praise for every minor accomplishment. He was their future, and I was the fallback plan. So when they told me I was old enough to stay home while they took Mark on a European cruise, it wasn't just a vacation I was missing. It was 32 years of cumulative disappointment, wrapped in a single careless sentence. They thought they were doing the responsible thing, treating me like an adult. But what they really did was remind me, again, that I was never really invited to the parts of their lives that mattered. And sitting alone in that kitchen, surrounded by polished marble and leather chairs and wine they never let me touch, I started to feel something new, something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't passive anymore either. It was a realization, a slow-burning clarity that maybe I'd been waiting for them to notice me for far too long. I started taking inventory, not just of the house, but of the years. Every favor I did, every time I stayed quiet, every time I stepped aside to let Mark shine, every opportunity they handed him that I never got a shot at. The list was long, longer than I liked to admit. And the more I wrote it down in that worn notebook I kept in my old nightstand drawer, the more I started to see a pattern that wasn't going to change, not ever. Because the truth is, people don't start seeing you after 3 decades of pretending you're not there. They keep not seeing you. And at some point, if you want to matter, you have to stop waiting for permission. So I made a list of everything valuable in the house, not just monetarily, but sentimentally. The painting above the fireplace that Dad bragged about getting in Prague for a steal, Mom's collection of silver spoons she inherited from her great-aunt, the jewelry box she thought I didn't know held cash and bonds, and a necklace she never wore because some things are too special. And Mark's room, oh, Mark's shrine of adolescent entitlement. The gaming setup, the laptop with all his projects, his sneaker collection still in boxes, his music equipment from that brief phase where he thought he'd become a DJ. I listed it all. I appraised it, cataloged it, took photos. I knew what everything was worth, and more importantly, I knew exactly how little they'd expect me to do anything about it. But I wasn't just going to take things. I wasn't going to steal in the traditional sense. I was going to reallocate. They'd handed Mark the world. I was going to take my share, late maybe, but mine all the same. And let me ask you something. Have you ever been left behind by the people who were supposed to protect you, supposed to love you without conditions, only to realize they never really saw you at all? What would you do if the last straw didn't break you, but finally set you free? Because I didn't cry when they left. I didn't miss them. I didn't even check their photos from Spain or Italy or wherever the hell they were that week. I just kept going, quiet, focused, strategic. And if they thought they were returning to the same daughter they'd left behind, they clearly hadn't been paying attention for the last 32 years. It began in silence, the kind of silence that hums in your ears when you're finally alone and aware that every sound, every step, every breath you take in the house is yours and yours alone. And for the first time in a long time, no one is watching or judging or interrupting. The quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt clean, like an empty chalkboard before the lesson starts. And I knew exactly what lesson I was about to teach. The night after they left, I walked through each room with a deliberate calm, like someone walking through a crime scene, except I wasn't mourning, I was planning. Every drawer, every shelf, every forgotten closet was a vault full of small, glittering payback. I moved slowly, almost respectfully, touching things I'd never been allowed to touch before. My mother's velvet-lined jewelry box with her wedding pearls and the tennis bracelet she only wore to charity functions. My father's locked cabinet that contained a small collection of single malt Scotch bottles and Swiss watches he never wore, but always mentioned when talking about real value. And of course, Mark's kingdom of gadgets and overpriced distractions, each piece representing another time they'd said no to me but yes to him. I started by taking photos, clear, well-lit, labeled. Each item got a spreadsheet entry. I didn't rush, because this wasn't desperation, this was accounting. I opened an anonymous email and created a burner profile on Craigslist, and then on Facebook Marketplace, and then on a few more niche collector forums. I uploaded the photos methodically with accurate but slightly vague descriptions. I priced everything fairly but attractively low because I wasn't trying to get rich. I was trying to erase the imbalance, even if it was only symbolic. I wanted their absence to be felt in their absence. They had left me behind, again, without thought or concern. And when they returned, I wanted the emptiness of the house to match the emptiness they'd cultivated in me over decades. Sales happened quickly. First it was little things, some collectible vinyls my dad kept in the office, a designer handbag my mom had once scolded me for even looking at, a few electronics from the basement storage that Mark never touched. Then the bigger stuff started going, the guest room furniture, a few pieces from the formal dining room, the art above the mantel. Buyers came and went while I kept the curtains drawn and my words clipped and polite. Family downsizing, I'd say, or my parents are moving overseas. Nobody asked for more, and I didn't offer. Some things sold online, without anyone ever stepping foot in the house, valuable things that got mailed to addresses I never remembered because they didn't matter. I liquidated over $15,000 in the first week, and I'd kept every dollar in a new checking account tied to an alias I'd built slowly over the last few months, not because I had planned this far ahead, but because part of me had always known it might come to this. I wasn't angry, I keep saying that, but it's true. I was calculating, cool, precise. I wasn't destroying things. I wasn't smashing heirlooms or burning photo albums. I was simply cashing in on the inheritance I'd been denied emotionally and rewriting the part of the story where I just disappear and nobody notices. The hardest part was Mark's room. Not because of any sentiment. I had none left. But because of how deeply curated it was. It was like walking into a tech startup built by a teenager with an unlimited budget and zero concept of gratitude. Laptops, monitors, VR headsets, limited edition sneakers still wrapped in plastic. Guitars he never learned to play. A signed football jersey in a frame like it was sacred scripture. I took my time there. I sold the items to people who actually appreciated them. The sneakers went to a collector in Seattle who nearly cried over Zoom when he saw them. The VR rig went to a community center that offered therapy for veterans. I didn't pocket every dollar from that part. I wasn't cruel, not entirely, but I made sure Mark's kingdom fell, brick by digital brick. And the best part? They never called. Not once. No check-in, no how are you doing back home, not even a casual message. Just daily posts of wine tastings in Bordeaux, gondola rides in Venice, sunrise selfies on the deck of a luxury ship, and always with Mark front and center. My parents grinning like two people who had done everything right. My mother's captions were the worst. Long-winded odes to motherhood, gratitude, and making memories with the baby before he's all grown up. I wasn't even mentioned. I wasn't tagged. You'd think they had one child, so I kept selling. I sold until the house echoed when I walked through it. The living room was bare except for the rug and the TV I used for background noise. My own room, once cramped with old furniture and things I never cared to keep, was now clean and sparse, just a mattress on the floor and a suitcase packed with what I actually valued. Clothes, journals, a few photographs I didn't hate, my laptop, the deed to the house in a Ziploc folder, the forwarding address written in small, clean letters. When I sat down on the last night before leaving, cross-legged on the floor, sipping a glass of my dad's scotch, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished, like a chapter had closed with a final, definitive click. And I didn't need to say goodbye. There was nothing left to mourn. Just a house full of silence and air and the memory of being overlooked so thoroughly, so consistently, that leaving without a trace felt more honest than any farewell. And the craziest part? I still hadn't done the one thing that would cut deepest. Not yet. That part was coming. Because revenge isn't always about screaming or fighting or slamming doors. Sometimes it's about letting them walk back into their perfect little life and realizing, too late, that the most loyal person they never noticed had rewritten the story while they weren't paying attention. I didn't leave a note, not because I couldn't find the words, but because there was nothing left to explain, nothing to justify, and certainly nothing that could fit on a scrap of paper that would capture the years of quiet, unresolved resentment that had been fermenting in me, like a sealed bottle of vinegar tucked away in a forgotten pantry. A note would have been a courtesy, and frankly, courtesy was a currency they had long stopped extending in my direction, so I saw no reason to spend any of mine now. The only thing I left behind, tucked carefully into a drawer that used to hold my mother's monogrammed stationery, was a small card with a forwarding address to a P.O. box in rural Oregon, neutral, vague, practical, and in the corner, I had written just 3 words in ink so fine and subtle that it required effort to even notice. Don't contact me. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a cry for help. It was closure, surgical and sterile, the kind that slices clean without fanfare. Because after all the years of playing the role of the overlooked, dependable daughter, I had finally become someone they couldn't reach. Not emotionally, not physically, and certainly not with the shallow guilt they would try to manufacture once they realized what had actually happened. The final days before their return were a strange blend of surreal calm and quiet elation. Not the manic chaos of someone running away, but the deliberate retreat of someone who had already won and was simply walking off the field, leaving behind the stadium before the other team even realized the game had ended. I slept on the floor by choice, not out of necessity, because the bed had been sold weeks ago to a newlywed couple who admired its antique frame and were thrilled to get it for a fraction of its worth. I ate simple meals, washed my few remaining clothes, and meticulously cleaned the house, not out of duty, but to emphasize the absence, the hollowness, the eerie museum-like stillness that would hit them the second they opened the front door. Before I left, I spent one last evening sitting on the back porch with my laptop, the same porch where we used to have family barbecues that gradually stopped including me once Mark started inviting his friends over. And I watched the footage from the front door camera, the smart ring system Dad had installed and boasted about as if it made our home smarter than the average bear. What he hadn't considered was that I'd set up a shared login months ago, back when I was managing his digital subscriptions and paying the bills without thanks. I knew their flight details from the airline confirmation they never bothered to password protect, so I had the exact timestamp of when the Uber would drop them off. They arrived looking exactly how you'd imagine two people returning from a luxury vacation across Europe, tan, relaxed, and clueless. My mother was wearing oversized sunglasses and dragging a matching set of luggage that probably cost more than my first car. Mark had his AirPods in, a designer hoodie, and an expression that suggested he hadn't had a thought more complicated than what to post on Instagram in weeks. My father was on the phone, probably with a client or maybe their cruise concierge, still wrapping up whatever first-class fantasy they'd been living. When they stepped through the door, I watched in silence as their expressions shifted, frame by frame, from confusion to disbelief to something much more satisfying: panic. My mother's hand went to her chest like she'd been robbed, and in a way, I suppose she had, though not in the way she thought. My father walked deeper into the house, calling my name once, then twice, louder the second time, the way people do when they're trying to sound in control, but the edge is already creeping into their voice. Mark said nothing, just stared at the empty space where his setup used to be, slack-jawed, frozen, and finally aware that something irreversible had occurred in his precious little kingdom. I closed the laptop slowly, not out of melodrama, but because there was no need to see more. I had already seen everything I needed. Their reactions weren't about me, not really. They were about the shock of losing what they had assumed was permanent, guaranteed, untouchable. They weren't grieving the daughter who'd left. They were grieving the comfort of their narrative, the illusion that everything in their world was just as they believed it to be: orderly, safe, predictable. The next morning, I drove out of the city in the used RV I'd bought with some of the cash. Not a glamorous vehicle, but solid, efficient, and more importantly, untraceable in any obvious way. I'd outfitted it over the past week while finishing up my operation, installing a solar charger, a few comforts, and a burner phone with a voicemail that simply said, "This number is not being monitored." I didn't need to run. I wasn't afraid. But I didn't want to be found either. Not by them, not by anyone who might try to return me to a life I had finally walked away from without looking back. As the city faded in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't pump my fist or shout in joy. What I felt was something quieter but far more powerful: relief. The kind of relief that doesn't come from revenge, but from reclamation, the slow, deliberate reclaiming of a life that had never truly belonged to me until now. And what they'll never truly understand, what I hope haunts them in the quiet hours of the night when the house is too quiet and the space too empty, is that I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it to stop hurting myself. There's something hauntingly satisfying about silence that follows destruction, not the kind of destruction you see in movies, where windows shatter and sirens scream, but the quiet collapse of an illusion, the slow disintegration of a false narrative that's been fed and nurtured for years until it becomes gospel. That silence is sacred. It's the sound of truth finally echoing through a space where lies once lived comfortably. And when I sat in that small RV on a dirt road, somewhere between eastern Idaho and the Washington border, sipping coffee from a chipped enamel mug and listening to the wind press against the metal frame, I realized that silence was mine now, earned, owned, and no longer shared with people who only ever used it to ignore me. The messages came first, as I knew they would, tumbling into my inbox in a flurry of confusion dressed up as concern, passive guilt masquerading as parental outreach, and beneath every word was the same desperate undertone: shock. My father's first email was almost comical in its brevity, as if he couldn't quite process what had happened. Couldn't believe that the daughter he thought would always be there, always dependable, had somehow outmaneuvered him with a grace he hadn't seen coming. "Where are you? What happened to the house?" he wrote, as if I had borrowed a lawnmower and forgotten to return it, not gutted the very foundation of their carefully curated domestic order. My mother's tone was different, more performative, layered with that trademark manipulation I'd grown up decoding like a second language. "We're worried about you," she said, though what she really meant was, "You've disrupted the story we tell people about our family, and now we don't know how to explain it without looking like the villains." She asked if I was safe, if I was okay, if I needed anything, but never once did she ask why. Because asking why would mean admitting there had always been something they chose not to see. And people like my parents don't like opening doors they've locked for decades. Mark's response, though, was exactly what I expected. Immature, entitled, emotionally tone-deaf. He didn't bother with pretense. "What the hell did you do?" was the first line of his message, followed by a list of items he claimed were irreplaceable, as if that was supposed to mean something to me. He didn't ask how I was or why I'd done it, just demanded explanations, restoration, a reversal of what he saw as a personal attack. I almost admired his consistency. Even in shock, he managed to center himself, unaware that he had always been the sun around which our parents orbit, while I'd been assigned the thankless role of moon, quietly revolving, reflecting someone else's light. I didn't reply to any of them, not because I had nothing to say, but because saying anything would suggest I was still available for the conversation, still willing to play the part of the middle child in a story that never included me as a protagonist. Instead, I listened. I let the silence grow. And the silence did what words never could. It forced them to sit with themselves. There was a part of me, I'll admit, that wondered if I'd gone too far. Not because I felt guilt. True guilt doesn't come when you finally put yourself first after a lifetime of being everyone else's afterthought, but because I knew how people like my parents would spin the story. They'd rewrite it as a breakdown, a betrayal, a mental lapse. They'd say I was always a little distant, a little difficult, a little unpredictable. They wouldn't say I was the one who babysat Mark every weekend, who gave up the college dorm to save them money, who came home every night to a room that hadn't changed since high school because they never once asked me what I wanted. They wouldn't say that, and they never will, but I don't need them to. That's the freedom. Freedom isn't always about escape. Sometimes it's about absence. It's about being the space they can no longer fill, the presence they feel most when it's gone. And that's what I left them with. Not a scream, not a fight, but a vacuum. An unmistakable gap in the center of their well-framed life, the kind of absence that makes them question their roles, their memories, their narrative. I cashed the final checks from the last few sales about a week after I left, and with that money, I bought 6 months of solitude, a private campsite in Oregon, supplies, a prepaid satellite plan, a tiny wood-burning stove, and books I'd always meant to read, but never had time for. I wasn't hiding. I was building. For the first time in my life, I was constructing something entirely my own, brick by metaphorical brick, without asking for permission or approval or recognition. And I know what some people will say, because I've imagined the comments, the judgments, the simplified morality people love to apply to complicated stories. They'll say I should have just moved on, taken the high road, had a conversation. But what those people never understand is that when you've spent 3 decades climbing uphill with people who keep shifting the ground beneath your feet, you don't want a conversation. You want closure. You want justice. You want peace that isn't prefaced with an apology you have to make just to be heard. So no, I didn't answer their calls. I didn't go back. I didn't offer explanations or second chances. I gave them exactly what they gave me for years, the opportunity to sit in silence and figure it out on their own. And maybe they'll never figure it out. Maybe they'll keep spinning the story to anyone who will listen, trying to make sense of the daughter who vanished while they were sipping champagne on the Adriatic Sea. But deep down, behind the denial and the defensiveness, they'll know. They'll remember the dinners I cooked, the rides I gave, the hours I spent listening to their problems, the effort I made, and the absolute nothing I received in return. They'll remember the look in my eyes when they said, "You're old enough to stay home alone," and they'll know that in that moment, they lost me. They can keep the cruise, the photos, the souvenirs, the stories they'll embellish at holiday dinners. I don't want any of it. I have something better, I have freedom, and I'll never go back.